The story you are about to hear is full of unexpected twists and profound emotions. It's a tale of how a fleeting infatuation can shatter seemingly unbreakable relationships, leaving behind only regret and shame. At the heart of the narrative is a woman grappling with the consequences of her own mistake, which casts a shadow over her future happiness and self-worth. How did it come to pass that a marriage, once seemingly perfect, teetered on the brink of collapse? At 30, Anita is a successful fashion designer who has dedicated most of her life to clothing design. She became passionate about this art form at the age of 16, acquiring her initial skills from her mother, who also worked in the field. She has been professionally engaged in her beloved profession for 10 years. Her husband, Derek, is a doctor, and together they appear to be the ideal couple. Anita and Derek, who is 32, live in Rochester, New York. Their marriage has lasted for 5 years, and Anita has always considered Derek to be her soulmate, the love of her life. They met in college and have been inseparable ever since. But what could have possibly happened to disrupt this idyllic existence? What events led Anita to commit an act that she now cannot forgive herself for? The answers to these questions lie in delving into the depths of this complex story. There's a common perception that the heroine's marriage to Derek is driven by his financial status, but she vehemently rejects such assumptions. She doesn't condemn those who hold this view, considering that Derek's appearance deviates from conventional standards of beauty and his height is below average. Nevertheless, these factors are insignificant to her. The primary quality that attracted her to Derek is his boundless care and attention. She is convinced that Derek loves her more than he loves himself and is willing to fulfill her every desire, exceeding even her wildest expectations. He is ready to do anything to see her happy. However, the couple's relationship encountered difficulties after Derek was transferred to a job in a neighboring city 6 months ago. He suggested that the heroine move with him, but she refused. As an excuse, she cited her clothing design business, although that wasn't the real reason. Subsequently, Derek accepted a job offer at a nonprofit organization and was assigned to a remote town for 2 years. The heroine couldn't imagine starting over in a new place, especially far from civilization, so she informed Derek that she couldn't move, citing her business. He understood her reasoning, but she noticed a shadow of disappointment on his face. Derek promised to visit once a month and asked if that suited her, to which she replied affirmatively. Separation can create a deep rift in a marriage, and this story is no exception. Distance posed a serious challenge, complicating even simple communication. Derek, engrossed in his work, still found moments to stay connected. He unfailingly made at least 3 calls a day and video chatted daily, striving to keep his promise to visit his family no less than once a month. Despite all of Derek's efforts, a sense of weariness gradually grew. Although he remained a close friend and partner in many endeavors, loneliness became increasingly unbearable. She missed the simple human presence by her side. One day, while returning from the store, her car suddenly stalled. Soon, a stranger approached her, his face vaguely familiar. Introducing himself as Nathan, a friend of Derek's, he turned out to be one of the groomsmen at their wedding. Learning about Derek's departure to work for the NGO, Nathan offered her a ride home since her car was in the shop. After some hesitation, she agreed. The ride passed quickly in lively conversation. Arriving at the house, Nathan offered to help with the groceries. Inside, after the groceries were put away, she offered him a cup of coffee. The conversation continued, and she noted Nathan's attractiveness and easygoing nature. Tall and fit, he could easily pass for a model. As he prepared to leave, she, succumbing to a moment of weakness, asked him to stay. They decided to have a glass of wine and watch a movie. Then, a lapse in memory. Nothing foreshadowed what was about to happen. The next morning, upon awakening, she found Nathan, her husband's friend, in her marital bed. This sight plunged her into a state of profound shock, akin to an electric shock. Memories of the previous night's events seemed to dissolve into a fog, leaving only a gaping void. However, one fact was undeniable. She had committed adultery with a close friend of her husband, and the circumstances that led to it remained a mystery to her. A feeling of emptiness and heartache washed over her like an icy wave. While her heart was breaking, Nathan displayed remarkable composure, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. He tried to reassure her, saying it wasn't a big deal and that she was far from the first woman to find herself in such a situation. He vehemently denied taking advantage of her vulnerability, claiming everything happened by mutual consent. However, her mind refused to accept these excuses, as she was too drunk to remember anything. Nathan offered to make breakfast, but she insisted he leave her house immediately. Nevertheless, he ignored her request, insisting on his desire to cook breakfast. Still in a state of shock and confusion, she couldn't stop him. She was paralyzed by fear and despair, not knowing how to handle this terrible situation. She was overwhelmed with guilt and shame. She wasn't proud of what she had done, realizing that Derek didn't deserve such betrayal. She couldn't understand what had come over her, how she could let herself sink so low as to have an affair with her husband's friend. She repeatedly asked herself the agonizing question, tormented by the thought that Derek would never be able to forgive her betrayal. Exactly what he feared the most had happened. Derek, burdened by painful past relationships, had deep-seated trust issues. He often shared his fears with her, telling her how materialistic women sought his wealth and ultimately deceived him. She sincerely assured him that she was different and would never cause him such pain. At first, Derek couldn't fully believe her sincerity. He found it hard to understand what could have attracted her to him if not his financial well-being. However, over time, she managed to earn his trust. She tried to show him that there was more to a person than just external attributes, and she helped him see himself in a new light. Now she realized with horror that she had shattered that trust. How could she convince Derek that her infatuation was just a fleeting weakness? She knew he would likely see her as no different from his exes. Fear gripped her as she understood how badly she had messed up. In the midst of her torment, Nathan entered the room with a tray of food. Despite the anger that consumed her, she couldn't bring herself to ask him to leave. He offered her breakfast, and she accepted it. Nathan comforted her and assured her that everything would be all right. Now, her conscience was nagging at her, because having the opportunity to stop, she continued to make the wrong choices. Her relationship with Nathan developed, and realizing the destructiveness of her actions, she couldn't find the strength to end it. Their relationship became so close that Nathan moved in with her. Derek, due to increased workload, could no longer come every month as before, but he tried to maintain daily communication with her. Every time he called, Nathan tactfully excused himself so she could talk to Derek in peace. At first, it seemed strange, but over time she got used to this routine. One day, the phone rang, and it was Derek, rushing to announce a surprise he had prepared. At first, she thought it was the usual package, but the reality turned out to be much more unexpected. Derek asked her to open the door immediately. Alarmed, she hurried to comply, but what she saw made her freeze in amazement. Derek himself was standing on the doorstep. It took a few moments to realize what was happening, and only a touch brought her back to reality. Derek, noticing the lack of enthusiasm, asked about the reason for such a restrained reaction. Realizing that she needed to act quickly, she began frantically searching for a plausible explanation. The initial idea of blaming it on a malaise was discarded because Derek, being a doctor, would surely recognize the lie. In the end, she decided to deceive him, citing severe menstrual cramps. Derek, knowing how painful these sensations could be, advised her to rest and relax. The situation was developing favorably, and she, carried away by Derek's care and attention, temporarily forgot about the delicate situation she was in. The events that followed were a complete surprise to her. Derek, going up to the bedroom to change clothes, unexpectedly found Nathan's belongings in his closet, from casual clothes to underwear. The anger that gripped him was felt in every word addressed to her. At that moment, she wanted to sink through the floor, disappear without a trace. She realized that this incident could be fatal for their relationship. She wanted to confess everything, but the fear of an imminent breakup held her back. She knew that Derek would never be able to forgive the betrayal with his friend. And yet, despite the inner struggle, she did not open up to Derek, and the truth remained unrevealed. She lied to him when he asked about the things found in the closet, stating that they belonged to her brother, who had allegedly come to town on business. When he questioned why she hadn't mentioned his arrival, considering their daily conversations, she simply said it had slipped her mind. Derek's confusion grew. Why were his brother's things in his closet of all places? At that moment, she realized her lies weren't convincing him, and he wasn't backing down. She tried to wiggle her way out, explaining that his brother was too busy with work, so she was just helping him with his laundry. However, judging by his expression, she knew he didn't believe a word she said. Despair reached its peak, and tears welled up in her eyes. She even dared to accuse him of not trusting her. The shame was burning her from the inside. She couldn't believe how low she had sunk. Derek, softening, wiped away her tears and apologized. After that incident, he never brought it up again. She bolted out of the house and dialed Nathan's number, begging him not to come back, as Derek was already there. Fate seemed to be watching over her, keeping Nathan away from the house by the time Derek returned. The entire time Derek was around, she skillfully feigned joy, but deep down, she was consumed by agonizing guilt. Seeing Derek reminded her of the reasons she had once chosen him as her husband, turning down countless other offers for the chance to be with him. It was at that moment that the full tragedy of her actions dawned on her. Before her stood a man who would do anything for her, a man who had gone against his own family's wishes just to be with her, a man who showered her with care and provided her with everything she could ever dream of. He was her rock when everyone around her called her a gold digger. He was the one who had fundamentally changed her life. How could she allow herself a fleeting affair with his friend? She had seemingly lost touch with reality, sinking into fatigue and apathy. Noticing the change in her mood, Derek had repeatedly expressed his concern and persistently questioned her about the reason for her state, but she couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. The fear of the consequences paralyzed her. Guilt gnawed at her for betraying him. It hadn't happened out of malice, but how could she explain to the man she loved that it was longing and loneliness that had driven her into the arms of his close friend? It should be emphasized that she fully understands her responsibility for what happened, but would she have dared to have an affair with Nathan if Derek hadn't been forced to leave? Suspicions began to creep into Derek's mind when she noticed him staring intently at the surveillance camera. Fortunately, she had the foresight to turn it off whenever Nathan was around. Derek began to monitor her every move and even secretly checked her phone, but all call logs and messages had been carefully deleted, which only fueled his suspicions. He was probably looking for irrefutable proof before voicing his accusations. The situation was further complicated when her brother never returned. She remembered that she had lied to Derek about her brother's visit. She had to make up another lie, explaining his absence by saying he had been urgently called away for work in another city. Before leaving, Derek shared his plans to retire and open his own clinic with her, to put an end to the endless business trips and start a family. This is a story about a woman torn between the joy of the prospect of starting a family and the anxiety of a mistake she made. She and Derek, her husband, had always dreamed of having children, but due to the unstable schedule of his volunteer work at a nonprofit organization, this moment was constantly postponed. Now that Derek has decided to settle down and dedicate himself to his family, the heroine feels mixed emotions. On the one hand, she is happy about the opportunity to become a mother. On the other hand, she is tormented by guilt over her affair with a certain Nathan. The woman realizes that confessing to infidelity could destroy her marriage. Derek, she says, has an unyielding character and has never forgiven his former lovers for cheating. It took her a lot of effort to win his trust, and now she is afraid of losing everything. Derek came home to finish his business and start a new chapter in his life. The heroine, realizing the need to make a choice, decides to end her relationship with Nathan. She arranges to meet him outside the house, but remembers that some of his things are still at her place. She calls Nathan to tell him about the breakup, explaining that she can't continue their relationship. Nathan, demanding an explanation, is met with her refusal to go into details. When Nathan comes to pick up his things, he sees the firmness of her decision, and as he leaves, he predicts that one day she will regret her choice and beg him to come back. The heroine dismisses his words, confident that this will never happen. In the midst of the tense verbal duel, the phone rang and she instinctively grabbed it, seeing Derek's name on the screen. Her heart pounded in her chest. She gestured for Nathan to leave and apologized, which he did. Answering the call, she heard Derek's voice, who simply wanted to know how she was doing and to inform her of his resignation. This news made her extremely happy, and they continued with a casual conversation. For a moment, she forgot about Nathan's presence in the house. Suddenly, during her conversation with Derek, Nathan burst into the room and in a loud and angry voice announced his departure, stating that he had packed his things. At that moment, she was seized with horror. He probably assumed that the phone call was over, since her conversations with Derek usually didn't last long due to his busy schedule. She desperately prayed that Derek wouldn't hear Nathan's words, but her hopes were dashed when Derek inquired about what Nathan was doing in their house. How did he recognize his voice? She had always thought they were just acquaintances. It's worth mentioning one detail about Derek. He had a phenomenal memory for faces and voices. It was one of his distinguishing traits. She was trying to gather her thoughts when he repeated his question about Nathan's presence. She was speechless with amazement. She never expected to be exposed like this, at the very moment when she had just broken up with Nathan. There was no longer any possibility of making up excuses. Her mind was completely blank. Derek confessed that he had suspected her lies from the beginning, when she claimed that the clothes in his closet belonged to her brother. His suspicions were heightened when he discovered the disconnected surveillance camera. He knew she was cheating on him, but he couldn't imagine that her lover would be his friend. In that fateful moment, when despair reached its peak, she couldn't hold back the tears. Hearing the demand to leave his house before the owner returned, the woman felt her world collapsing around her, burying her hopes and dreams under the rubble. Unable to force herself to leave Derek's house, she wondered where she could go. Returning to her parents' house seemed impossible. How could she explain what had happened? Deciding to ignore the consequences, she decided to wait for Derek, naively believing that he would be able to forgive her, knowing that loneliness had pushed her to cheat with his friend. However, her hopes were not fulfilled. Derek, upon returning, was in a rage, the likes of which she had never seen before. His anger only intensified at the sight of her. He demanded an explanation as to why she was still in his house and threatened to call the police, accusing her of trespassing. The woman's pleas were in vain. Derek insisted that she only take what she had come with 5 years ago, leaving everything he had bought her, whether it was slippers or hairpins. In desperation, she fell to her knees, begging for forgiveness and a second chance. But Derek was adamant, unwilling to listen to her arguments. He vowed to make her life unbearable. All attempts to convince him were futile. The worst part was that she couldn't ask for help, as she would have to explain the whole situation, knowing that no one would understand her predicament, not even her friends, who had always envied her marriage to such a loving, and generous man as Derek, who had provided her with everything she needed throughout their life together, relieving her of financial worries. Realizing Derek's inflexibility, she gathered only the essentials and left their shared home, unaware that this step would be her last. She spent the night in her fashion boutique, hoping that the argument with Derek would subside. The next day, temporarily closing the store, she sent the employees home, trying to sort things out and understand how to get her husband back. In an inexplicable way, her life had turned upside down. Just recently, she was enjoying the luxury of a mansion, and now she was forced to live in her own store. Everything happened so quickly that it seemed unreal, like a nightmare from which she desperately wanted to wake up. After spending several days in the boutique, she couldn't hold back the tears, realizing how her life had changed. Lost in gloomy thoughts, she didn't notice herself falling asleep. The next morning, she was awakened by a phone call from their lawyer, who insisted on a meeting. She invited him to the store. Here, a crushing blow awaited her. The lawyer arrived with divorce papers. She refused to believe her eyes and signed the papers. Attempts to contact Derek were futile. He had blocked her number. Deciding to go to his house, she didn't manage to leave the store when a group of people appeared, whom the lawyer introduced as the new owners. She was paralyzed with shock, and only the remnants of her strength allowed her to stand on her feet. It turned out that Derek had sold her store and donated the proceeds to charity. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. How could Derek do this to her? She never suspected such meanness in him. Yes, he opened this store with his money after their wedding, but it was she who, through her hard work, turned it into a thriving business. How could he so easily betray her efforts? Despite the fact that his name was on the ownership documents, she never entertained the thought of divorce. The situation unfolded with unexpected speed. The new owners of the store gave her only a day to vacate the premises. Surprisingly, she greeted the news with a measure of relief, as a flicker of hope for reconciliation with Derek still burned within her. She felt that this time would be sufficient to convince him to forgive her and reverse his decision. With a hopeful heart, she went straight from the store to Derek's house, only to face another shock. It turned out that Derek was not simply hurt, but quite resolute. He had sold their shared house, and she was now forbidden to even step inside. At that moment, it finally dawned on her that she had lost everything. However, there was no time for self-pity. She understood that Derek was acting deliberately, seeking to inflict maximum pain. Unsuccessful attempts to reach him by phone only strengthened her conviction. Eventually, she steeled herself, signed the divorce papers, and decided to begin a new chapter in her life. Leaving the store, she decided to stay in a hotel temporarily. But even here, she was dealt another blow. Her bank card was declined. As it turned out, Derek had been busy here too, emptying their joint account. The irony was that she had once suggested the idea, naively believing that a joint account would give her unlimited access to Derek's money, which he earned significantly more than she did. That day, she experienced perhaps the most humiliating moment of her life. The hotel manager was clearly unhappy with the situation and seemed ready to cause a scene. Unwilling to exacerbate the situation, she preferred to retreat before things got out of control. She found herself in a desperate situation, a homeless, divorced woman, deprived of any means of subsistence. Alimony could only be awarded after the divorce proceedings were completed. In that dark hour, it seemed that her life had come to an end, and she had ruined her own well-being with her own hands. When all hope was gone and there was nowhere to go, she decided to contact Nathan. At first, the man ignored her calls, but persistence prevailed, and he answered. She offered to meet and talk, but was met with a refusal, citing business and lack of time. She shared her story, told him that she was homeless and needed a place to stay. Nathan said that he was out of town. When she asked if she could come to his house, he replied that his girlfriend was there. This news was another crushing blow for her. It turns out that Nathan had a new love, and it was time for her to move on. He stated that their relationship was nothing more than a fleeting fling with no serious prospects. After that, Nathan switched to another topic, beginning to talk about a chance encounter with a certain Derek in a bar. Overhearing snippets of a man's conversation, she inadvertently witnessed a discussion of female infidelity. Derek, she heard, spoke highly of her, expressing confidence in her devotion and unconditional trust. However, driven by some inner impulse, he decided to test the validity of Derek's words, staging a kind of provocation. To her deep regret, she was not ready for such a test and succumbed to the cunning tricks. The realization of her own frivolity came to her as she listened to Nathan's speeches. At that moment, she felt tainted, wondering how she could have fallen victim to such a primitive manipulation. Despite all her attempts, she could not find the strength to forgive the mistake she had made. The anger at herself was so great that it plunged her into a state of deep depression, depriving her life of all meaning. She could not find the courage to contact Derek to ask for forgiveness for the broken trust and the pain she had caused. Gathering together the fragments of her former life, she decided to return to her parents' house in Chicago, where she joined her mother in her store. However, like wildfire, rumors of her infidelity quickly spread throughout the town. Life once again lost all meaning and perspective for her. Imagine the striking contrast. Just recently, she lived a life fit for a queen, in the luxurious chambers of a vast palace. And today, Fate has thrown her back into a quiet provincial town where she is forced to depend entirely on her parents. She could not even afford the most necessary things, such as underwear. From that fateful day when she succumbed to fleeting passion and entered into an affair with her husband's friend, her life turned into a nightmare thriller. Unquenchable lust came at a tremendous price, and now she realizes that what was lost was not worth the momentary pleasure. Her heart is full of regret, but she understands that time is irretrievably lost. She regrets taking that fateful trip to the grocery store that day. She regrets meeting a certain Nathan and giving in to his temptations. That's how she ruined her marriage and her own life. This is her personal story, and she hopes her experience will serve as a warning to others. She urges everyone to remain faithful to their partners and never forget to be grateful to those who care for them. This simple truth seems to be known to everyone but herself. She says goodbye and expresses her hope that her story will serve as a lesson to